So here we are. I can't believe it's our fifth installment of our, yeah, only one to go. Yeah, so shall we jump in with what we're talking about today?
Sure. Do you want
Okay.
to kind of kick us off? I'm not sure if you did an intro before I jumped on.
I did a quick intro, but I'll do it again just for anybody that's signing on. I'm Melissa Stringer. I'm an LPC based out of Texas.
Yeah, and I'm Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed mental health counselor out of South Florida.
Yeah, and just our kind of quick spiel before we get started. Diana and I met a couple of months ago now over a mutual love for ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And we have been doing presentations on these, or IG Lives on these 6 core processes. And we've already done 4. We're on our 5th one today, which is values. And so I think we had decided we'd do like just a real quick recap, right, of the other 4, and maybe just explain a little bit about what this the aim of this model of these 6 core processes integrated is supposed to create psychological flexibility.
Yeah, so maybe let's start off with, the whole purpose of these 6 different skills that we're going through. And even though we were like trying to break them down, we talked about in different talks that really in sessions or in your daily life, it's kind of hard to sparse out all these different concepts. They actually tend to go all together. But the whole goal and why we even teach or talk about these skills is because we're trying to do or reach what's called psychological flexibility. And so the reason we want to be more psychologically flexible is that we want to have the skills to be able to kind of bend and turn and make kind of move towards what matters to us despite what's happening internally. So when uncomfortable thoughts or feelings show up that we all have, or when life just throws us curveballs, because last 2 years has been a great example.
Big old curveball.
Yeah, all these curveballs that's happening. And so when that's going on either internally or externally, or honestly a combination, the whole point of psychological flexibility is that you can figure out how to still bend and do things that are important to you, and what are the skills you need to do to get there. And I think you've done this really cool example of it's kind of like yoga for your mind.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we're just trying to expand our capacity to tolerate that which is not under our control. That's it, because there's just all going to be, like you said, all kinds of stuff coming at us in life. Some of it's controllable, a whole lot of it is not. I think if we were looking at a pie chart, more of it is not under our control than is in our control. So just about adapting and evolving in a really workable, functional way to all that stuff that shows up.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we quickly go through our talks, I think talk 1, we talked about this kind of fancy way we talk about, it's called diffusion. And pretty much it's just learning to create some distance and space from those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings that show up if and when they're not helping us, right? So I think that's a big kind of core component. We're not saying create distance or space from things that are serving you and helping you. Right. If they're working for you, keep doing it. But when you notice you're getting stuck, or you're maybe not living the type of life that you want to live, then that's when we're kind of trying to build a skill of creating some distance and space from these uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, or even memories or sensations that might show up that might get in the way of doing what's important to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. So that was diffusion. I think our next one was acceptance, right?
Yeah.
And I think just a really concise way of describing acceptance is the practice of creating a higher window of tolerance for those, like I was saying a while ago, those uncontrollable aspects of life, those things in our inner world, like our thoughts, our emotions, our bodily sensations, that are very conditioned responses based off of a lived history. Like we don't get a delete button. We don't get to, it's not a buffet of I get to choose the good emotions in life and leave the rest on the, the unwanted ones on the buffet that I don't want. So that's what the practice of acceptance is all about, is learning the distinction between the two. What can I control, what I can't, and just learning to roll with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that closely ties to the third one we talked about, which is present moment. And sometimes it's really hard, again, to kind of distinguish this one, but this is really the skill of learning how to come back to the here and now. Hi, night owl.
Hello.
Owl day dreamer.
Yes. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, absolutely. And so with present moment is, so this is a great example, right? So present moment is really being engaged, right? And so like when there's this message kind of really coming back to the moment, right? So what's in the here and now, what's happening, what can I feel, what can I see, how can I ground myself back with just my breathing that's always happening in the here and now. And so this is a really great skill. It's sometimes, you know, linked to mindfulness, which is a pretty common concept of learning how to be present non-judgmentally with your experience. So, oh, great. He's international. Nice. Hi.
Oh, cool.
He or she, sorry, I'm not sure. I can't see the picture, but that's
very
awesome.
cool.
I'm so glad we have people internationally.
Yeah.
So that was the present moment. And then I think that led to our fourth one, which I believe was self as context.
Self as context, right. And I think some synonyms that we had thrown out last time to help kind of folks get the feel of this, because we explained it, self as context is more of an experience rather than like trying to nail it down verbally. So like your observer self, your like pure self-awareness or pure awareness is how some people describe it. But ultimately it is the skill of learning how to take different perspectives, shifting your perspective from one place to another, and seeing things in a different way. And again, kind of that distance, you know, the aspect of distance that we find in diffusion, but a slightly different slant with the perspective taking skills, like being able to move from behind your eyes, behind the eyes of another, in another place, in another time. So I think that kind of sums up maybe what self as context is, right? Because that's the more abstract one, as we had discussed before.
Yes. So we definitely encourage you, if you want to learn more about that one, kind of listen to that talk, because that one tends to be a little bit more like mindy. And even for myself, it's hard sometimes to nail, but I think a good one is exactly like you said, that just this part of us that we can always tap into, is to start learning to shift our perspective, especially if we start getting really attached to certain identities about who we are or so forth.
Yes.
Or, and I think, or we're trying to live up to a certain type of identity. So I think that's just a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, so let's jump into today.
Yeah.
Okay, so today we're talking about, sorry, I was trying to read the message and I couldn't do both.
That present moment getting us again.
Okay, so it sounds like, maybe there's just, you'd like to share some stuff. So we definitely encourage you maybe just share in the comments,
Sure.
and or during or after, and then we're more than happy to learn or about your situation, your family, or any kind of questions that come up as we do the talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So today we're actually talking about values, and it's such a kind of ironically great time to talk about values, because and we didn't plan it, honestly.
No, we didn't.
We should say we did, right? Because it sounds
right, because
like
it would have been really cool.
spot on. But with values, it's really, I think, end of the year, new year. It's all about learning. You know, a lot of people start to figure out, like, okay, what was this year like? What worked? What didn't work? You know, there's a lot of talk about resolutions, whether you like them or not. But I definitely think this time of year is the time to evaluate, right? And decide how you want to move forward in the new year. So given that, you know, a lot of people that are kind of doing this introspective work and figuring it out, values is something that can really help to clarify how you want to move forward. So, you know, just with a simple definition of values, it's just being really clear on what are the qualities that you want to embody in this life. Like, how do you want to show up in your life to the things that are meaningful to you? So sometimes it's really kind of asking yourself, you know, in 10, 20, 30, 50 years, right? When you look back at your life, what are the things that you want to say you stood up for, right? What are the things that were meaningful that you showed up for? And so when we think about values, that's kind of what we're really tapping into. Like, what are the things that are important to you?
Right, absolutely. You know, there's this act matrix that we do with our clients sometimes, right? It's basically, I mean, it sounds fancy, but it's literally just a grid, like a horizontal and a vertical line with 4 quadrants, right? And in one of those quadrants, right, is really like this development of values, right? It's the question of who and what matters to you, right? And so that's where we just generally begin to get a basic sense of what's important to someone. It's just asking that question, who and what's important to you in life. And it's right. It's often the things that our clients bring to us that are distressing, that is indicative of what it is that's important to them, right? Because they wouldn't be upset about it in the first place if it wasn't important to them. So just kind of starting at a place like that and beginning to sort of tease out, okay, so that's really important to you. What do the actions and behaviors look like that would move you towards that, right? That would reflect that that is important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of a great metaphor way to think about it, it's like really thinking of like a North Star, right? So what is your North Star in that, when you think about your life and, what's to guide you, like a North Star can be that guidance, or like, I think of like a lighthouse for boats, right? That kind of send out the light and the signals when you're out in sea to get back to port. And so similarly, when we think of our values, that's our guiding post, right? That's what we can turn to, especially when we're feeling lost or confused or distressed that maybe you aren't living your life to your values, something's off. You can really kind of tune into, okay, what is my North Star, my compass, or my lighthouse that can help me get back on track?
Absolutely.
And so,
yeah.
And I just want to make a very quick note that unfortunately, we can't provide any individualized professional opinions on any individual cases. And so our hope with some of these lives is just to give some general tips. So we'd really encourage you. I know on my profile, I have like emergency resources if anyone needs to talk to someone internationally or locally, that have both listed there. So I really encourage you to do that, because unfortunately we're limited in not being able to provide professional advice or opinion through these types of platforms. So I just wanted to kind of throw out that disclaimer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. So kind of going back a little bit, we want to talk a little bit about how North Star, kind of inner compass. So that's one way to think about values. I think another part that we think about is that values is more about the process and not the outcome, right?
Yes, absolutely. Right. It's, I always think of a donkey and a carrot metaphor, right? I use this all the time in sessions. Like, clients will come, and myself too, I'm totally guilty of being very goal focused, right? I want to see the outcome. I want to know that I've hit the mark. I can check that box, right? Whatever that is, and sort of get lost in, well, what are the thousands and thousands of actions at your disposal on the way to that goal, right? And that's more describing the process and being able to kind of immediately in the moment access your values. Like, what is important to you about moving towards this goal, right? And I think sometimes we begin to hold outcome focuses very rigidly, like we're just obsessively checking, am I there yet? Am I there yet? And it's just like, that's a miserable journey, right? Like, that's a miserable way to exist in life, is just to look at either I do have this, or I have accomplished this, or I haven't, right? And as long as I'm in the I haven't category, then that equals bad, or that's not good, right? I can only be happy when I've checked the box. And that's right where, we're trying to encourage the use of values. Like, no, this is under your control. Right. Because moving towards our goal exactly the way we wanted isn't always under our control, right? Like, if we had a goal of working out 3 times per week at the gym, right? And that's what we wanted to do. Well, we're going to have injuries. We're going to get ill. Our family members are going to get ill, and if we just like, okay, well, can't reach my goal, so guess I can't do anything, that's, that's really going to drain you. It's going to make you very discouraged. Whereas you could take alternative actions, like, I'm going to have a glass of water. I'm going to drink plenty of water today, or maybe I can get out for a 10-minute walk in the sunshine. Whatever that is. Yeah. So more flexibly moving through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like you said, when we get too rigid to goals, and I know I've been guilty of this at times too, we can get so focused. I could get so focused on like, okay, what's the next carrot, or what's the next box I'm trying to check off, which makes me really lose focus from the here and now. And honestly, sometimes can set me up for failure, because the reality is that we can't, it's great to have goals and so forth, but that doesn't mean that we can't live in the here and now. And that's one thing I really talk about with my clients with values. It's, you can embody your values at any moment in the present, because values isn't something that you check off. Meaning, let's say my value is relationships, having a loving relationship, right? I can
Right.
check off maybe a goal, let's say getting married, right? I can check that off at
Yeah.
some point. But in terms of having a loving relationship and showing up as a loving partner, depending on what that looks like for me, I could do that every single day, right? And so that's
Right.
kind of the one really cool piece when I think of values is that if you get really clear on them and what matters to you, you can show up with your values at any given moment, no
Right.
matter how long it's been since you've practiced them or not, right? Or whether you hit the
Yeah.
goal or not. Because, again, sometimes when we, like you said, when we get too rigid on that goal, we can sometimes maybe feel disappointed when,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, now what? Right?
Right. Like, I'm here.
What's the
I
next
thought I was
thing?
supposed to be happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So,
And right, it often is that we do get a sense of accomplishment or happiness when we've ticked that box, when we actually meet that place. But how long does it last? Right? Like, I mean, I've never met a goal that made me perma happy. Like it's right. Often your mind is just hungry for the next one, right? And the next one and the next one. So it can become this endless, kind of cycle of chasing something rather than living something.
yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of this great example of if you were to, let's say, take two kids to Disney World, right? And
Yes.
so you're driving your, two kids, whether your kids or whatnot, family to Disney World. And one kid tends to be like, we're there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And I actually laughed because I had a little cousin who was like that. Like anytime we take him somewhere, he's like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Right.
And he was
Sounds
just so
familiar.
focused on like, are we there to this, of course, Disney World, this fun, great place. And yes,
Yeah.
of course, it'll be great when you get there. But, this kid is so focused on getting there. Whereas this other kid, same situation, they're also going to Disney World, but outside of just like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Ever so often he will ask, but he's like checking outside of the window and like kind of noticing like, oh, look at these cool cows there, right? Or like,
Right.
look at this like farm area that I've never seen because we've never driven through here. Or like, just look at these cool buildings, right? And
Yeah.
so this, kid, it's clearly still wants and values and wants to get to the outcome, wants to get to Disney World and is excited, and it's also really focused on like what's happening now, right? And just
Yes.
trying to take it in and being curious and kind of
Right.
seeing everything. And so again, it's not so much about the outcome, but it's about the process, and both
Yeah.
are ultimately striving for this same outcome, but the
Mhm.
process is so much more different.
Absolutely. Right. And that process or that journey felt like this embodied sense of what that felt like moving through it was probably way different for both kids. One was
Yeah.
all uptight and like rigid and anxious, the whole time. The other one was just kind of more flexible and kind of easygoing and just like, whatever, just rolling with whatever. There might be feelings of boredom that arise. There might be feelings of satisfaction that arise when they see things outside that's interesting, but just way less of that rigidness and anxiety and pressure and urgency and all of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so I think another point we wanted to talk about, it's like when we're thinking of values, we also want to be clear that values aren't these like rigid rules, right? And
Yes.
so I think sometimes, again, myself included,
Yeah.
you know, we can sometimes fall trapped to that these values have to be these like rules that we have to hold on very rigidly to. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, kind of two different perspectives on this. On one end, like we've talked about, holding on to anything too rigidly might not help you, even if it's a goal, it's related to a goal that's meaningful to you. When you get too stuck to it, and then maybe it causes you to feel shame that you're
Yeah.
not always doing it or so forth, then it's kind of backfiring.
Yeah.
And then also, when we think about, really holding on to these values as rules, it's sometimes kind of being clear, is this even a value that's important to you? So
Yeah.
sometimes, whether it's through our upbringing, our family, culture, there's certain messages that we've received or certain kind of messages about, these values that we should have, right? And
Absolutely.
so, and maybe you even think like, yeah, this is a great value that I should have. It makes sense,
Yeah.
But when you step back, you kind of realize, but this isn't important to me, right?
Right.
At
Yeah.
my core, it can be a good value for someone else. Maybe it worked for my family or whatnot, but it doesn't really resonate with what's important to me.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And I think, you know, I think we're getting better, but I think as a society, right, like women have been kind of socialized to be very giving and nurturing and maybe selfless in some cases. And right, they learn that from their mothers or their grandmothers, and this sort of rule based thinking like, this is the way I'm supposed to show up in life. Right. This is the way I should operate and navigate through life, like always overextending myself, always being giving, right? And that, again, like you begin to really rigidly hold on to that. You cannot see a spectrum of how those behaviors could be enacted, right? Okay, so you want to be giving, so you want to be kind, but there's lots of different ways that you can do that, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of breaks up that rule-based thinking and moves it from a rule and helps it evolve like kind of more into a value. Okay, if that's important to you, that's fine. But let's look how the other like kind of rule following way is working for you. You are
Yeah.
drained, you are stressed, you are anxious, you are always feeling guilty because you feel like you can never do enough for all the people in your life you love. I think a lot of moms are guilty of this, or struggle with this. But it doesn't have to be that way. Like whenever we can begin to incorporate a more values-based approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love kind of like you said, like even as and like I know a lot of moms kind of, struggle with that, right? Mom guilt, right?
Sure.
And that's it's hard to kind of figure out what really matters for you and kind of trying to sparse out again what are the messages and that a society or your family or whatnot are giving you and being clear on like what matters to you. And sometimes that takes some time and work to really get to that sense of
That
clarity of
balance.
yeah, absolutely. And then how you actually live that out in your day to day. And of course, not every day might not look like that, but in just kind of this moment to moment, once you're clear on this, like, okay, how will this show up flexibly versus this rigid rule or commandment that you have to follow?
Right. No matter what.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I think, kind of going in the vein that we've been trying to do kind of different exercises throughout our talks to kind of illustrate
Yeah.
these points that we've been talking about, we wanted to kind of jump into that. And so we're going to start with just kind of a first exercise. And so whoever's watching live or after the fact, ideally, if you grabbed a piece of paper, if not, you can just kind of think of these things as we're kind of asking you. And Melissa and I will both participate as well, just so you guys kind of get a sense of how this works. Okay. So the first exercise, again, I just want to put disclaimer that this is an exercise. If for whatever reason it feels overwhelming, by all means, you do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. And yet, when thinking of doing this exercise, we both thought that it was pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So we want you to imagine, and actually, I don't know if I see my, can you see my? I don't know.
I can see it. Yeah.
Okay. So I want you to kind of imagine that there was two kind of tombstones, right? So if you just had a piece of paper, you can kind of just, on one side, put a line through it or flip it over or whatever makes sense. So in this tombstone, you're going to kind of write two different versions. So if you were to today be your last day, right? If today was your last day on earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had one tombstone that was the tombstone that would be the most ideal version of what you would want it to say, where you would look back and think, yeah, this is what I would want my life to stand for. This is what's important and significant to me, that I wish I valued, that the people around me saw, and things like that. And so you would write like, here lies, so in my instance, here lies Diana Garcia, and then what I want my life to stand for. Okay.
Yes.
And so I'll give people a moment to write that down or to think about that. All right. So then on the other side, whether you flip this sheet of paper or you put a line through, now we want you to think about same scenario if today was your last day, right? And you're writing, writing this tombstone. Mm-hmm. Now we want to write this tombstone of what are the things that you have done to try to control or avoid uncomfortable experiences, right? That have shown up in ways that they've stopped you from living the life you wanted to live, right? So for instance, Here lies Sally. She was never embarrassed, right? Because she never put herself out there, right? To be embarrassed. So really kind of thinking, again, maybe thinking of it in this other way, what are the things that you don't want your life to stand for? What are the things that maybe sometimes they do show up, but gosh, it's because you were trying to control and avoid, but then you end up missing out on other things that are meaningful.
Right. Oh, this one's less fun to do.
A little bit.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So we're going to share ours just to kind of give you guys a sense. So Melissa, do you want to start?
Sure, absolutely. Shall I start with the control avoid side?
Sure, let's start with control avoid. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's get the yucky one out of the way. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here lies Melissa. She never made any mistakes. She never took any risk in her relationships or within her career. She managed to never feel regret.
Okay. So I'm going to share mine just because I'm smiling because so here lies Diana Garcia. She always played it safe in life to prevent failures, criticism. She wasn't willing to be vulnerable in her intimate relationships, but she stayed safe at all cost.
Oh, okay. I see some common denominators.
Yeah, that's why I'm like smirking. I was like, I think there's something here.
Right. Yes. Okay. Let's redeem ourselves now.
Okay. Okay.
Here lies Melissa. She learned a ton about life through trial and error. She loved deeply and loyally those closest to her. She remained true to herself and did what she believed to be best for herself and others.
Okay. So here lies Diana Garcia. She loved her people fiercely, embodied values of courage and connection, and was willing to face failure and pain to pursue what mattered to her.
Oh, I love it.
Okay.
That sounds like a life well lived.
It does. It does. And, I appreciate it in both of ours how it doesn't mean that the stuff we're scared of goes away.
Right. Nope. Still there and still moving in a particular direction despite what shows up inside. Yeah. Right. That's living your values and moving towards meaning. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think when we're talking about psychological flexibility, this kind of gets at the core here, right?
Yes.
In that we get clear on what matters to us. And, I know kind of thinking of your death and what's written on your tombstone can sometimes feel a little jarring.
Yeah.
And yet sometimes that might be helpful to help you start thinking about, okay, what are the things that really matter to me, right? What are the things that, I want my life to stand for despite what might show up, right? And, going back to this end of year, maybe just do this exercise thinking of this past year, right? Yeah. If you were to think of this year, how would that tombstone be written? Were there areas that maybe you'd be really glad how you showed up, and maybe some areas were like, ooh, maybe not so much, right? And both are okay. It's just kind of you starting to get clear on like, okay, now that you know what matters to you, how can you accept and drop into these uncomfortable experiences that are still going to show up, right? Because I think that's really important. The only way they're not going to show up is if you just don't ever put yourself in a position where you could potentially get hurt or be vulnerable. It makes me think, I was recently listening to a podcast with Kelly Wilson.
Yeah.
And he was saying that values and vulnerabilities are poured from the same vessel. Yeah. And so I think that's really cool to think about, in that what really matters to us, what really can hurt us, also just shows what's really important to us, right? It's kind of like they're super linked.
Absolutely. Right. Like two sides of the same coin. Yeah. And another, like on one side of the coin is your pain and the thing that's distressing to you. And then you can usually flip that coin over and find what's important to you on the other side. A question that I often ask my clients when they're just deeply in distress and they just want more than anything for that distress just to go away, right? Just to engage in one of those short-term strategies, or one of those strategies that just create short-term relief, right? But more problems in the long term. And I'll say, well, what would you have to stop caring about right now to not have this distress? And that will usually help people really kind of connect to, oh, this isn't optional, is it? Like,
No.
no, you don't want to be worried about your kid and their health, or especially if they're going through something. Okay, well, can you turn off your care switch for your kid? Oh, no. It's like, okay, then, all right, let's see where we can work with this from a different angle then.
Right. And I love this piece of, it's kind of like you said at the beginning, we can't just kind of let the good feelings in and, okay, we're not going to feel all these uncomfortable feelings, right? And it's the same piece of these two sides of the same coin. Like, okay, the only way you're not going to worry about your sick kid is if you don't really care about them.
Yeah.
And is it worth that trade-off, right? Is it worth the trade-off of not worrying? You're never going to have ever again a worry about your kid's health. But the trade-off is no anxiety about it, no concern, is you won't care about your kid. Right? That's the trade-off. If you want to throw away this kind of vulnerability, you have to throw away this value. And is that really worth it to you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and just another quick example that comes to mind is doing grief work with clients, right? Like, I don't want to feel this grief. This is horrible. This is the worst thing I've ever felt. And 100% compassion and validation for that. It is some of the worst emotional pain you can ever feel. Totally get
absolutely.
that. But at the same time, it's like, I want this to go away. And I was like, well, if we make that go away, what else do we push away? And it's like, oh, memories and a connection that mattered, and a connection that I still want to keep alive inside my heart and my mind. And it's like, okay, yeah, so sadness is going to come along for the ride, sometimes in different intensities. But, so when you push that away, you push away the good as well, the meaningful.
Yeah, it's kind of like the only way you'd escape grief is if you never had that relationship with that person.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And is that something you're willing to trade off, right? This not feeling this unbearable pain, because it is unbearable.
Yeah.
But means that you never would have had this relationship with this person, right?
Never would have deeply connected with that person or deeply loved that person. Would you really want to delete that so that you wouldn't be feeling this now?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I think that's kind of starts to wrap up our different kind of thoughts about values. Is there anything else that comes to mind for you, Melissa?
I'm trying to think if there were any other kind of helpful like metaphors that really, when I was learning this stuff, that was like made it more clear for me. There was one called The Journey of Life. And it was just, I can't remember all the details of it, but it was just basically like, you're looking at a compass, north, south, east, west. And, values is kind of like, choosing a direction and moving in that direction. It's like, okay, you want to move west, towards a particular goal, right? You're going to meet some goals along the way. But once you've reached, whatever is west of you, right? Does that mean west is over? Like west is done, we're done traveling west. And it's like, no, west is forever. You'll travel west forever, right? But you'll just check, boxes of goals along the way, along your trail. So I thought that was a really kind of helpful way for me personally when I was learning this stuff. It's like, oh, okay, it's a continuous direction. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like you'll make all these little stops, but you won't ever kind of check off. You can always continue heading. Like your compass isn't going to say, okay, now this is the end of west.
Absolutely. Right. At west end, no more west.
Yeah. And I think that's lovely how you had said earlier too, because if we get so focused on each of the stops, right, on each of the goals, that then we lose sight of like, we can constantly, in the space between the goals, we can still be heading west, right? And so we can still be showing up a certain way in our lives based on what matters to us, right? Whatever qualities those are, we can still show up even if we're in between these goals that matter to us as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's it for our IG Live, our fifth IG Live. We just want to thank everyone who joined, who
Yeah.
commented. Again, I just wanted to give the unfortunate, we just can't provide any individualized recommendations, but of course we have resources on our profiles to help anyone that needs any type of resources in that regard. And we just want to thank everyone who supports, comments, watches during, before, after, because it's just really encouraging, right? I think one of
Totally.
our kind of North Compass has been to try to really share this information and show up a certain way. And so it's just, not to say, it's nice to kind of get some feedback and know, hey, okay, this is kind of why we're doing the stuff we're doing.
Absolutely. Totally reinforcing every comment, every, show of support, everybody checking in. It's awesome, right? Because like you said, it's, I think, part of our value system, as helpers to come on and try to share some stuff that might help someone who's struggling, or, bring about some self-awareness, or just any little bit. Like, that's a valued, part of our direction in life. It's so yeah, it means a lot to be here. This is us living our values.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with that, our last IG Live in this series will be at some point in January. We haven't nailed down, I think, that date. And then that one, I guess we can just give the topic. That one will be all on committed actions, which
Yep.
again is just so right timing, because I think January, New Year, we're all looking at making shifts or changes, or if we're not, it's just still a good time to think about, okay, what does that actually look like in practice? Everything we've talked about, how does that translate into behaviors day to day?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so if you want more content like this, you can always go back and get, if you can follow Diana at Nurturing Minds Counseling, me at Connect and Reboot. We are ACT practitioners, so we have a lot of this type of material, a lot of content like this, and all of our previous IG Live recordings are on my profile, and I think most of them are on your YouTube channel, right?
Yes, absolutely, which is also at Nurturing Minds Counseling YouTube, and so all the recordings have been, I've uploaded them on there as well.
Cool. Awesome.
Right. Well, then I hope everyone has a great end of year. Happy New Year. And then we'll see everyone in the new
year. Yeah. See you next year.
Yeah, which is next week.
Right. All righty. Bye, everybody.